Hi, everyone. It's the most wonderful time of the year, the ranking where we look at the sustainability performance of the world's 50 largest chemical companies. ChemScore, it's out. And boy, do we have a great webinar lined up for you. Not only will you get all the details from the ranking, from the masterminds behind it all, Mr. Ligthart and Sonja Haider from ChemSec, but we have also invited a couple of distinguished guests here. So we have Mariana Villanueva from AXA Investment Managers and Dr. Greg Porta from this year's top scoring company, SABIC. So after their presentations, there will be a Q&A session, but you don't have to wait to post your question. At any time during the webinar, you can go to the Q&A section in your Zoom window. It's in the bottom there, and you can write your question. Please do not write the questions in the chat. Use this Q&A function. It's much easier for us. So thank you. Yeah, we're excited to kick off. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to my fantastic colleague, Mr. Data himself, Ligthart.
Thank you very much, Peter. And if we can have the next slide, please. I would like to start by giving a brief introduction to ChemSec. ChemSec is an environmental NGO who engages in the political debate on chemicals regulations. We want to challenge companies, both chemical producers as well as downstream users, to improve their chemicals management. We want to help them by developing solution-oriented tools and facilitating the shift from hazardous chemicals to the safer alternatives. But of course, we also want to inform investors about the risks and the dead ends connected to the production and use of hazardous chemicals and the business opportunities stemming from safer alternatives found in the chemical industry. One thing I would like to highlight is that we are financially independent of the companies we work with, since we have our funding from the Swedish government and charity foundations. And since we are not for profit, we want to be out of a job, actually, with a vision of a planet beyond chemicals pollution and with us on a permanent vacation. Next slide, please. So, with that said, I would like to give you an overview of what ChemScore does and why we have chosen the approach that we have. The bottom line is that there's a gap that exists in the usual ESG analysis, since the chemicals topic is not properly covered by any other ESG ranking as we see it. We choose to put the spotlight on this rather narrow topic, chemicals, and highlight it from 4 different angles in 4 different categories, to be as thorough as possible. And in this way, we want to assess the performance of chemical companies with regard to the most material subject for these companies, the production and use of hazardous chemicals. So the 4 subjects we're having are the hazardous product portfolio, the development of safer products, the management and transparency of the companies, and lack of controversies. From our perspective, the importance of the individual categories are reflected in the maximum obtainable points for each category, which is between 18 and 6 points we can see, with a maximum total of 48 points. I will go more into detail of the hazardous product portfolio, but also mentioned in category 2, we're looking at the safer alternatives. Are the company producing and using? Are they investigating how to find safer alternatives? What are they using to be able to have safer products in the future? With the management transparency, we're looking more general, not substance or product specific for the company, but on a more holistic level. Are the company transparent in what they're producing? How they are dealing with things? Do they have visions? Do they have safety management and so on? And then the final category, lack of controversies. We see this as more or less as a control station. Has there been a lot of accidents, spills, environmental fines, and so on? And this is just to see if they're walking the talk or not. But it's important to mention that we only look at the data and information found in the public domain, because we cannot take it into consideration any confidential information shared by the companies for the scoring. Anyone should be able to replicate the scores for every company in the same way as we've been doing. Next slide, please. So, as mentioned, the single most important criterion for chemicals companies, which is more or less ignored by other sustainability rankings, is the production and use of hazardous chemicals. What are the companies actually placing on the market? What properties do they have, and what harm can they cause? And why do we find this so important? The obvious reason is the negative effects they have on human health and environment. And in ChemScore, it's also due to the financial risks connected to it. We have tailored this criterion to cover the financial risks to investors from two different angles. We're looking at the regulatory risk, so loss of market due to substance bans, and the risk of future litigation stemming from hazardous properties of produced chemicals. So therefore, we've applied weighting factors to each hazardous chemical each company produces, depending on where in any regulatory process they currently are, and depending on the intrinsic hazard they carry. So an example, substances already banned in the EU or internationally, they are penalized for this, likewise as persistent chemicals, the intrinsic hazard like PFAS, they can cause huge future litigation problems, which is also then accounted for in our assessment. In addition to this, we also want to be able to evaluate all companies with the same measuring sticks, large and small, if it's based in the US or in the EU. So irrespective of size and where it's headquartered in the world. And to compensate for the lack of transparency when it comes to production and use of chemicals outside of the US and EU, we only take into account the sales stemming from these regions when we do the final score in this category. And use to this balancing scheme, you could call it, a company seemingly very few substances on record, one or two, they could still get a very bad score in category 1 if the sales in the EU-US portfolio is also very low, because we can't simply see the rest of the product portfolio. Next slide, please. So the methodology as such has in principle been unchanged since last year with just minor modifications. But what is new is that we have added a sizable number of PFAS substances to the sin list, and which is to a large extent the foundation of this first category. So we have done so due to the large implications from both a regulatory standpoint with a broad PFAS restriction on the horizon in the EU as well in the US on a state level, as well as a tidal waves of litigations flowing over PFAS producers worldwide. And it's important to cover this fact in the scoring as well. So looking at this table, it's easy to see the weak points for some of the most PFAS producing companies. And 4 of the new companies in this year's ranking are all large PFAS producers, here marked with the purple dots. And Sonja will talk more about them in a minute. But important to mention is that not just these 10 most producing companies, but half of all the companies in ChemScore are actually producing PFAS substances. And they're ranging from the 63 of chem hours down to one single chemical. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerker, for presenting this. And before I hand over to Sonja, Haider, I would just like to ask you, Jerker, I mean, you've been doing this ChemScore ranking now for 4 years, and we will see here later that there is no top scoring company, and hasn't been so for 4 years. That we don't have a company that has scored A yet, which is the top score. Why is that? Why hasn't any company scored an A? And when will that happen, do you think, Jerker?
Yeah, we ask ourselves the same thing, because actually, when you look at the score, the individual score that all the companies have, if you take the best from each category, then we will have an easy A. Then it would be an A scoring company. If you take the best of category 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is obviously possible, but it's not, as we've seen, it's not one company who has been able to tick all the boxes in all 4 categories, but it certainly is possible. And we're hoping that we see a positive trend in transparency and also to a certain extent, reduction of hazardous chemicals. And with that happening, if that trend continue, I think within a few years, we will have one company scoring an A on its own merits, not just the best of the best.
All right, looking forward to that. So with that, thank you, Jacke, and I will hand over the word to Sonja Haider. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. And could you put up the next slide, please? I will show you more of an overview. And here you see our universe made out of 50 companies worldwide. You see we have a stake in America, a stake in Europe, and quite a large stake, almost half of the companies in Asia now, with 13 Japanese companies, and then also Braskem in South America and Sasol in South Africa. And you can identify the new companies for this year's ChemScore again with the purple dot, the PFAS producers, Chemours in the US and Honeywell. And in Japan, we have HEC and Daikin, because for us, it is always the questions, where could we have the biggest impact and where is it needed to really change something in the world? And therefore, we took in the PFAS companies, we took out the gas companies because they only have very small fraction of hazardous chemicals. We thought that this is now more relevant also for the investors. And you also see the points up with the green arrows, and where it's going down, the red one. And many companies have had the same score than last year. Next slide, please. Yeah, and our top scorers and also the bottom three, the slide. And I'm very happy to have SABIC and Greg on the call. He can answer us a few questions because they really made a big jump, 13 points up, which we haven't seen so far, mainly due to the increased transparency. But we will come to that in a minute. Indorama, also an Asian company, has been our top scorer for the last 2 years. It's slightly down just because of calculation of their EU-US stake, which are now more realistic. We had to estimate it the last years. So I think this is now more a realistic score. And the company has generally quite a very good chemical management in all categories. Yara is a company which is upward moving from year to year, which we see that is very nice to have them now on the number 3. Going down to the bottom 3, Chemours joining us for the first time, having a huge PFAS portfolio and also litigation mounting, therefore ending already in the first year down in the bottom. Sumitomo Chemical, there we lack information still, as even the most normal things you are looking for in a chemical company. Yeah, so the assessment of their sustainability of their products, but also the assessment of intrinsic hazards. So the intrinsic hazards, we couldn't really identify it clearly. So that's just one point to show you there is really a lot of clear communication missing. We really would like to see more. And DuPont, our lowest or impossible to rate company, because they are still hiding their US portfolio, which is really going in the wrong direction, as we really need to have more transparency. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this slide, you will receive the slides afterwards. You can see this graph also on our website. It gives you a greater overview where the companies are in the ranking. You see that 48 points, we are still far away from that. Nevertheless, it's really picking up. And you see also the difference between the years if you have a closer look. But I would like to highlight only a few SABIC. The biggest mover, there is also Shin-Etsu and Wanhua Chemical, which had quite a nice move upwards. And what I like most is those ones who are constantly working in improving. And I would like to name a few besides SABIC. It's Yara, Lanxess, Solvay, Ecolab, Eastman, Evonik, Nutrien, and Sasol. Next slide, please. And if we go into the regions, this is America. You see it's really quite spread out. The average from last year didn't change at all, so it's really stagnating. Avery Dennison on the 7th place is the top scorer in America. If we go to the next slide, we see Asia, and with the jump of SABIC, we really have also an increase in the average here in Asia. But you see most of the companies are more to the right end, mainly because we really lack the knowledge of the production in Asia. And we weigh this into the scoring. If you go to the next slide, you see Europe. And here, Europe is leading with the average score, around 18 points, slightly up from last year, and Yara and Johnson Matthey in the lead. And Umicore still has to show more what they are doing. I really do think that they are doing the right thing, but we still can't identify it so clearly like the others. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, and if we go to the key result, and for me, the main outcome for ChemScore this year is that we really see increased transparency. It's a very different transparency, very different measures the companies are, or communication the companies are doing. SABIC has really published their product portfolio globally. It's called Business Overview. You can find that where they publish all single substances, including the volumes for the facilities, and you really get a complete picture of the company. And we think this is really an impressive step. Eastman and Lanxess, they had already last year put on their website a statement that they are not producing any additional substances of very high concern outside the EU and US. So with the EU-US authoritative data, we catch all of those hazardous chemicals those companies are producing. Braskem has also a brochure about their global portfolio valuation book, but we miss the single substances. Sometimes there are products named or substance groups, and we really would like to see it down to a substance level as SABIC is doing. And Kima has a different way of communicating. They show the substance of very high concern in numbers, a little bit like we do in our SIN producers list, but they show it on a global level, which is, again, a step forward. Still, we would like to see which substances are those. And nevertheless, all of those positive transparency steps. Again, to mention on transparency is DuPont, because this is the only company in our whole universe of the 50 largest chemical company globally, which do claim confidentiality for the whole US production. And therefore, it's really a black hole. The financial risk can't be evaluated. We can't do an evaluation, so they get an F due to that. Next slide, please. And finally, these are some questions, the most important questions in my eyes from our category 2 and 3, so alternatives and management and transparency. And we see, again, transparency about the global hazard portfolio, or diagonally down the SVHC revenue. Only a few companies are showing that. And for the two other things like designing out SVHCs from new products and phasing out from existing ones, also there we only have 2 out of 50 or 1 out of 30 companies who are doing that. And we really would like to see more of that.
So thank you, Sonja. Thanks for this great overview of this year. So myself, I'm already looking ahead to next year, since you know all the details. So I'm going to ask you, what are the improvements that you would really like to see for the coming year?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this slide, this designing out and phasing out chemicals. I really would like to have more companies committing to those plans and showing it publicly. I really do think it's needed to understand where is the progress, where are the companies heading. And the second thing is really the transparency, which we had the slide before. I really would like to motivate companies to copy what their peers are doing and really increase that transparency.
Okay, great. And before I hand over to the next speaker, I would just like to prompt everyone that you could put questions already now in the Q&A box. I see that some have already started to asking questions, so you don't have to hold up. You can do that already now. And with that said, I'm going to hand over to Mariana Villanueva from AXA Investment Managers.
Thank you, Peter. So thank you for having me today. So first of all, I would just like to welcome the publication of a new ChemScore, as it's just such an important input and starting point for preparing our engagement activities. Really happy to see all of the improvements on the transparency front. So before I dive into how we're engaging with the chemicals industry alongside 50 other investors, and obviously with the invaluable support of ChemSec, I just wanted to take a step back and provide insight into why investors such as ourselves at AXA are looking at hazardous chemicals in the first place, and why we see value in engagement. So Jörger already hinted at some of those reasons, but it's great to have the space to be able to dive into that. So at AXA I would say that there are 3 main factors that are influencing our interest to engage with the industry. Firstly, just to set the scene, biodiversity and nature is a thematic that is growing on our responsible investment agenda and that of others. So while still very much in the early stages of grappling with the complexity of this topic, we have begun the process of deepening our general awareness and knowledge of the impacts our investment activities might have on nature and biodiversity, and also trying to relay that into our stewardship and engagement activities little by little. So as we turn and tune into nature, we find that it's very relevant to take a look at what the chemical industry is doing, because we know that unwanted emissions can occur and end up in the environment all throughout the chemical life cycle. It can also concern the entire value chain, really. And we also know that pollution in all of its forms is one of the 5 drivers of biodiversity loss identified by the IPBES. Moreover, a recent multi-tool study published by the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation also identified the chemical industry as having one of the greatest potential impacts on biodiversity. So from a thematic perspective, it just makes sense for investors that want to address the topic of biodiversity in nature to start looking upstream and examine the practices of the chemical industry before substances can even make it into the environment. And then secondly, just from an ESG materiality perspective, as Jörger kind of touched upon, we find that the topic of hazardous chemicals in particular does have the potential to be materially, financially material to the companies that an investor might hold in their portfolios. I think we can say that there are cases recently that have illustrated how these risks might crystallize. Liability risk potential in particular is quite material and can be quite material, as the recent PFAS litigation waves are just demonstrating, which can obviously have a bearing on the financial performance depending on the company and the severity of the case. And for persistent chemicals like PFAS in particular, as these substances can linger in the environment long after production but also use has ceased, they can end up posing latent liability risks just waiting to crystallize. And we notice that many of the cases today are reckoning with legacy PFAS emissions, meaning these issues don't simply disappear overnight. Moreover, I think that the magnitude of the liabilities and associated costs are really difficult to estimate, even for the companies involved, which doesn't necessarily help investors have greater visibility over this issue. And above and beyond the litigation piece, I think there are a lot of contextual dynamics in the picture, such as the very clear trend towards regulatory tightening, changing consumer preferences, as well as the scientific understanding of substances and safety levels having evolved over time and are likely to continue to do so, all of which I think expose companies to certain transition risks. So hazardous chemicals in general are certainly on the investor radar. It's important for us to be able to understand how companies might firstly be materially exposed to this issue, and secondly, how they are positioning themselves on it. I touched a lot on the risk perspective, but I think the opportunities angle is equally compelling, as there could be upside to be captured for companies that are able to position themselves quite early on this topic, not just by better insulating their business activities and models, but also by being able to respond to all of the changing regulatory and consumer demands. While managing chemicals sustainably is a relevant topic for us as investors from both the thematic standpoint and also the ESG materiality potential perspective, we're finding that company disclosure on this can be limited. This has already been alluded to. At the moment, there is certainly not yet a standardized and comprehensive disclosure on hazardous portfolios across the industry, for example, which this year's ChemScore demonstrates, although we're happy to see moves towards greater transparency. So in general, with these factors in mind, we're of the view that investors do have at their disposal an important lever to exercise, which is proactive engagement, especially if it is designed to help support the need to ensure that risks and valuation are being adequately appraised and that hazardous substances are being adequately managed by the companies that we hold in our portfolios. If we can go to the next slide. So with that, I'm really happy to share that something new in the investment engagement landscape this year is the Investor Initiative on Hazardous Chemicals, the IIHC, which was launched early 2023. It's a collaborative engagement platform where over 50 investors have come together with the aim of bringing forward 3 simple but quite hefty asks. And ChemScore is an important piece of information that helps to inform this group's engagement activities. The IIHC specifically targets companies rated by ChemScore, and we're asking these companies whether they are producers or users to do 3 things. The first is to increase transparency. It's a topic that's come up again and again throughout this webinar, but we'd like for them to bring into the public domain the share of revenue and production volume attached to hazardous chemicals, which, among many other things, would be really beneficial in indicating materiality of company exposure to investors. Second is to phase out persistent chemicals. Many of us recognize that persistence alone can be of concern from both a health and environmental perspective, which is why we're requesting that companies publish a phase-out plan in order to get upstream of any potential issues to the extent possible. And the third is to develop safer alternatives. I think this is the positive impact and opportunities perspective that we think is equally important. It's not just about limiting risks, but also positively responding to the transition opportunities that I mentioned in the beginning. So how are we doing these things? We started by co-signing letters last year, encouraging companies ranked by ChemScore to address our 3 asks. And then in the first half of this year, we moved forward by actively dialoguing with a select set of companies in the ChemScore universe in order to try to bring these asks forward a little bit more proactively. So the IIHC is an investor-led initiative, but we're also supported by ChemSec, which has been a tremendous help from a technical standpoint and through the groundwork being done through ChemScore annually. The underlying sub-criteria in ChemScore and also the research carried out by the ChemSec team in order to rate the companies are really valuable input to shaping the dialogue that we hold with companies. Investors can use the ChemScore data as one of the starting points to assess where a company might stand on a range of different topics, such as the size and nature of the hazardous portfolio, the quality and nature of disclosure and transparency, the actions it has in place not only to minimize hazardous substances, but also shift towards developing safer alternatives. And then we can take that and complement it with company level research and other sources to inform and shape our dialogues. So what ChemSec has done for investors is to systematically arrange for preparatory calls before the dialogues take place, where they can use and share the research they've gathered via ChemScore with the investment community to pinpoint where they see as key areas for improvement, but also, more importantly, to also lift up best practices in the ChemSec universe. I think the ability to cite concrete examples is of particular value to our discussions, as companies do want to better understand exactly what investors expect, but also what their peers are doing, not just what they're doing today, but the progress they've been able to make. So having examples in the ChemScore universe to lift up helps to reinforce our position as well, that certain practices are possible and they're already being implemented. And there are companies that can have upward movement, like Sonja mentioned, and I'm really eager to hear what SABIC has to say about this. In terms of what's next for the initiative, so we've just sent out another round of letters, once again encouraging companies to address our asks, and we'll be starting a second round of dialogues from now until the spring. And I'm happy to see that membership has grown. The IHC is gaining a bit more traction, but also the companies the IHC is dialoguing with is also growing, reaching about 20 for this next call season. So I'm looking forward to be able to once again revisit the data behind ChemScore and draw upon the expertise of the ChemSec team and see whether or not the companies I'm dialoguing with are evolving in certain practices and what we can lift up.
Thank you, Mariana, and thanks also for the nice words about ChemSec. Yeah, I mean, you should probably come work here. It sounds like you know it almost better than we do. So you've been with us now in the IIHC for almost a year. So, and obviously, like you just said, AXA is putting a lot of effort into engaging with chemical companies. Now, a new season of engagements will start. What are the main things that AXA would like to see from the companies you are engaging with? Could you elaborate on that just shortly a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we just held a kickoff workshop yesterday, so I guess I can get a bit of a fresh reflection on that. But this year, our dialogues had just begun, so I'm hoping that when we get back in touch with the companies for the second round, they're ready to start moving forward again, very constructively and fruitfully, now that they're more familiar with the IIHC, what we stand for, our asks, why we're asking that, and that the positions of all of the members are quite clear. So I'm hoping for companies to just generally come in ready for, I think, a deeper exchange where we can go into the nitty-gritty, positions that are related to our ask and explore how we might come to common ground on some points, even if they might seem modest to begin with. And I really did get the sense from the first round that companies are generally open to investor feedback. So there are reasons to be hopeful that the conversations will still be fruitful. Okay,
thank you for those inspiring words. And with that, I would like to leave over to our last speaker, Dr. Greg Porta from SABIC. And SABIC is, of course, this year's top scorer. So, Greg, please take it away.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here representing SABIC and to be honored, all right, with the being recognized and awarded the #1 rank for 23 in ChemScore. What I'd like to do over the next few minutes is starting by giving you a sort of a profile of the company. If you go to the next page, please. So SABIC is a multinational petrochemical company based in Saudi Arabia. They've been in operation for over 5 decades. When you look at the company itself, in terms of impact and size. If you go back to the 2023 earlier this year Forbes assessment, we're ranked number 4 in the world in our particular industry, the chemical industry. We operate in over 65 companies in terms, or countries in terms of plants, and we have over 30,000 employees globally. If you go to the next slide, please. This gives you an aspect of our business portfolio, and we typically separate it into 3 areas. Petrochemicals, so polymers and basic chemicals, as well as specialty polymers, and then finally agronutrients. All right, so fertilizer based products to support the world. One thing, if you're looking, you won't notice is, because I know this has come up a number of times, we do not manufacture PFAS substances, so you won't find that on the list. Next page. Now here we get into the meat. All right, so SABIC sustainability priorities and our sustainability program. So based on a number of UN Sustainable Development Goals and our materiality assessments, we focus on 4 major areas. One is on climate change, right? And our initiatives to drive our goals towards corporate carbon neutrality. The second is circular economy. We all understand the challenges of plastics waste, and circularity is going to be extremely critical, right, in achieving and addressing those challenges. The aspect that's very important to this discussion today is safer chemistry, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that. But safer chemistry is really our focus on looking at our product portfolio from a human health and an environmental fate perspective, and taking actions on hazardous chemicals in either substituting them, eliminating them completely from the portfolio, or reducing them, right, in concentration in the products. And then finally, everything also depends upon what we call ESG disclosures, and you've heard this by many of the speakers so far, increasing transparency, all right? And one of the things that's unique, and if we go to the next slide, and this gives you an indication of our safer chemistry program. So safer chemistry actually started in 2021. All right, and what we found was that there was a key connection. All right, so it's that formal program to looking at substitution, elimination, and reduction of hazardous materials in our portfolio. It was very closely linked to what we found in ChemSec and their ChemScore. I think Jerker had commented on this earlier, and that was that when you look at ESG overall, all right, ChemScore is unique, and it married well with the direction we were setting, all right, within our safer chemistry program. So it became something that was important to SABIC, and something obviously that we wanted to improve our scores in. And I'll talk about that in the future in the coming slide. So when you look at 2023, right, in our safer chemistry program, and if you want to know more about it, you can look in our 2021 and 2022 corporate sustainability reports that are available online. They'll detail the process that we use and how we go about addressing what we term chemicals of concern in our product portfolio. But in 2023, some of the key things that we worked on were developing a communications plan, both internally and externally. We completed a benchmarking exercise. So what are our peers doing? How are we doing versus our peers? And then taking the concepts of safer chemistry that we've developed and incorporating them more and more, both into the way we design products and our management systems that the company uses to operate. We also worked with our procurement organization, all right, because we were also interested in the value chain and the supply chain in reducing the hazard profile from raw materials for some of our key suppliers. And we had some business KPIs endorsed. So these are internal metrics on continuing to drive forward with identifying those opportunities for substitution, elimination, and reduction. So where do you see us all right, in 2024, based on some of our learnings that we've had this year. One, stronger connections to both NGOs like ChemSec and ESG rating agencies are extremely important. That transparency, I'd say that overall, SABIC does an okay job, all right? But we all have room to improve, and I say that probably for not just SABIC, for our peer companies. A second area we're going to focus on is including safer chemistry concepts into an industry-led effort called Together for Sustainability. It's driving sustainability through the supply chain. All right. So we're the first company, I believe, all right, to start introducing safer chemistry concepts into our supply chain evaluation processes. Right. So how we qualify suppliers, for instance. And then finally, continue to utilize external platforms to market our safer alternatives. One of the things we found was, and this is part of our benchmarking, was that some of our peers did a better job at marketing some of the great alternatives that they developed, and we have the same, and we haven't done that. So that's going to be a focus, all right, for 2024. Next slide. So increasing transparency. I know this is a big topic, all right, because our customers, the brand owners, NGOs like ChemSec and ESG ratings community are driving, all right, the need for better transparency on how you manage your hazardous chemical portfolio, and demanding that increased transparency. And when we look at our journey, all right, starting in 2012 when we introduced our first corporate sustainability report, until 2023, we've seen steady progress and more willingness to be transparent, all right, about what we do and how we manage our portfolio. There's been a lot of changes, and Sonja had mentioned, all right, the global portfolio information that's available on our website. So we've been using our SABIC.com website as a primary means, and we've upgraded it, all right, I'd say about every year, and we have plans to upgrade it again with more information, right, in 2024 to achieve that transparency around hazardous chemicals and how we manage them. So go to our website, check it out, all right, you'll see information around safer chemistry and circularity, et cetera, our overall sustainability program, and be expecting to hear more from us in the future. I think that's it for this. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. You spent a bit of time talking about transparency. Obviously, it's a big thing in this year's ChemScore. But for this year, what you've done at SABIC is that you disclosed your whole product portfolio of chemicals, including the volumes of these chemicals. But when other chemical companies are asked to do the same, they claim it's CBI, that they can't do that because this information might be used by competitors. So how come SABIC can disclose this information?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Let me preface this. So you're talking about peers that are saying no CBI, but let me give you a little bit of our journey, because if you noted during Sonja's presentation, you saw that SABIC has continually, year after year, in the first 4 years, continued to improve our scores. So in 2020, we didn't even know what ChemScore was. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, SABIC receives information that we got a D+. We were ranked a D+ in our first score, and we were like, "Wow, how did that happen?" Right? Because we thought we were doing a lot of good things, and what we found out is that when ChemSec sent the information for providing details to the company, it went to our investor relations team, which is not the team you want to go to. You actually want to go to the experts within the company, all right, like product stewardship, to be able to understand and develop a response to ChemSec. So the next year, as I mentioned, we started the Safer Chemistry program, and then we made the link to ChemScore, right? Found out more, and we increased our score, all right, based on information that we made public, especially through the 2021 Corporate Sustainability Report. Then we actually had a formal effort right, to get into the top quartile in 2022. All right. And we got into a C rating. All right. We were in the top quartile, number 12. And we were like, okay, all right, let's learn more about what we can do to continue to increase our score, because ChemScore became more important to us based on our safer chemistry program. And we did that this year, made even a bigger effort. All right. And surprise, I mean, because, you know, I would have been, you know, very happy to be, you know, in the top 5 or 6, right? To be number 1 just way exceeded my expectations, when was a big personal surprise to me. So, one, is ChemScore important? All right, in terms of being responsive. All right, can you find the connection to your internal programs? And I believe many of our peer companies have similar programs. They're just not out there maybe publicizing it as well, all right, as SABIC is. You have to get the information to the right people, all right, that can interact with ChemSec and understand what it takes to improve your score. Now, from a CBI, and that was the bottom line for the question that you just asked, Peter, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because, okay, at least from a SABIC portfolio perspective, because we don't make too many specialty chemicals. We make basic chemicals. We make a lot of polymers, and we make fertilizers. So we know what our competition does. We know their facilities. We know where they're producing product. We know their volumes. So to me, you know, calling that information CBI, you know, doesn't have a lot of weight in my mind, right? Because we know the competition already knows. So protecting those fundamental pieces of information doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Thank you. Sorry, we have to move on because we have many questions. But thanks for that presentation and the answers. So I'd like to invite in all other speakers to join me and put on your camera. Before we move ahead, here you see lots of information where you can find more ChemSec information. So just choose and pick, or take them all. It's up to you, and connect with us. We have many questions, and many questions have already been answered by Jarke here, who's been very arduous. But Sonja, so we have many questions around that is around like how we have chosen these 50 companies. How come we have just these 50 companies? Can you please elaborate on that?
Yes. So first of all, we are an NGO. So normally this evaluation is done by rating agencies. They have a business case. We have limited resources, but we really felt that this part of the chemical management is still missing in all these ESG ratings. And therefore, with our limited resources, we have chosen that we can do 50 companies where we go through really in detail into their reports and questioning, getting also a dialogue starting. So that's why we have chosen the number of 50. And then we are looking at chemical companies which are standardized by it's called the GICS standard. This is used by investors. So those are in our main focus. And there, from the revenue, the largest ones down to number 50 that we have chosen. And then there are a few which are of specific interest for our investors, for example. So, as I said, this year we have also the PFAS producers incorporated. So that is how we have chosen the companies. There was a question on Borealis and another company. They are actually too small in our universe. And then there was also a question about leather chemistry, so polluters. This is more the downstream users at the end. Of course, there are a lot of companies which do have specific pollution topics, but we are really focusing on the chemical industry as the producing part.
All right. So the main then criteria is the revenue, how big the company is. That, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sonja. Jarke, does the ChemScore report take into account the final use of each substance? So meaning, PFAS is problematic, but it can also, help the green transition and curb emissions and carbon emissions, etc. Do we take that into account?
No, because it's quite impossible from our end to see what is the end use of a chemical. Because these chemical producers that we are ranking in ChemScore, they are from basic chemical producers down to some are almost formulators, and it's very hard to say what is the end use of a specific chemical. So it's impossible for us to say, because one chemical could have 100 different uses. So how would we know which uses this chemical company where it ends up? So that is virtually impossible. Okay. So that's why we can't really take into exposure, and we cannot take into a specific use. What we do take into consideration is if a chemical is used as an intermediate only. So, for example, a substance which is completely used and consumed in the process to produce another chemical. Those substances are called intermediates in the chemical regulation lingo, so to say. And those substances we do exclude from ChemScore, because that's something that happens only within a factory, never leaves the factory gates. But that is the only discrimination we do.
Okay, thanks. Sonja, this ChemScore report, how are ChemSec planning to use that? Will we target policy makers with this, or will we use this in any other way and just targeting investors?
No, it's definitely, we will use it in all our efforts, and we do have a department in ChemScore, our policy department, and we are quite active also in the implementation of legislation. So we are in committees, REACH committees. We are talking to policymakers on certain topics, and of course the ChemScore results and also the progress which is made is I think very interesting, and also now the specific knowledge about PFAS and PFAS production, we definitely will use this in our policy work.
All right. So Greg, here's a question for you. During your presentation, you said that SABIC is not manufacturing PFAS. But have you identified all uses of PFAS throughout your product portfolio?
Oh yes, yes, yeah. And it's not just a product portfolio; it's also our plants, because there's a lot of indirect uses, not actually in the products themselves, but the plants to manufacture the products where certain PFAS is used. I mean, almost all of it is polymeric PFAS, right? Due to its chemical inertness, so the Teflons of the world, that don't present a human health or environmental challenge directly, but still pose persistence as an issue.
All right. Jeke, do you also include the use of microplastics and the elimination from production and use in companies in the evaluation criteria?
No, we do not, and that is also because that information is not available to us. Because a substance, we're looking at substance by substance, cast number by cast number, so to say. And for us, it's impossible to know if it's a microplastic being produced or if it's general plastic. So we always depend on what is in the public domain, in public registries, and since that information is not available, we cannot take it into consideration, unfortunately.
Okay. Sonja, are we planning to expand the scope? I'm reading the question to more companies and more industries. I'm thinking that is what the question refers to. Can you answer that, please?
Yeah, well, we haven't made up our minds for the future. At the moment, we are just happy to have finalized this year's ChemScore, but we will take that with us, definitely. We always try to make the impact as big as possible, and of course, covering more companies would be interesting. Nevertheless, this is a resource question. But what I would like also to mention is that the chemical companies we are scoring are very different. And you see that on ChemScore website, you can filter those companies, and some of them are formulators. We always have the question, we are not a chemical company, we are just a formulator. Well, we see that the responsibility is still there for using the hazardous stuff, but we have so to compare peers, because it's sometimes also a bit unfair to compare I don't know, base chemical with specialty chemicals and so on. So you have the filter where you can filter to the peers.
Okay, thank you. Mariana, a question for you. So in the IIHC network of investors that you mentioned before, do investors have very different views depending on where in the world they are from and what kind of an investor it is? What's your opinion on that?
I think that we tend to have quite harmonious core views, because when we signed on to the initiative, we all agreed that we support the 3 asks and that's what we want to bring forward. But maybe we can have differences in how we want to bring about those asks and the strategy and the approach that we might take to company dialogue.
But do you have a lot of freedom, would you say, in the initiative to kind of tailor it how you want to do it, or is it like uniformity that everyone does the same?
Yes, that's a good point. So while we do have the 3 asks, which are kind of our North Star, definitely each group of investors has the prerogative and freedom to decide how they construct the dialogues and what they prioritize. And that will can reflect maybe different regions that they're coming from, or different appetite or approaches. But for sure, we have that North Star and at the same time, a lot of flexibility.
All right. Sonja, more questions for you. So within the CSRD, a balance of products and many other data points will become mandatory. This is your field of expertise. So many numbers need to come from the ERP systems, many acronyms here. I'm not sure that everyone understands this. Maybe you could also elaborate on what they actually mean before you answer. But many new programming needs to be done and checked to be aligned with external auditors. This is a costly and time-consuming undertaking. This is more like a statement, not a question, but I still think you want to answer that anyway. Yeah?
Yes, I would like to go into that, because this is the future.
Yeah.
Actually, it is, I think in just a few weeks ago, it went through. So now it's in force, the company, the corporate reporting of sustainability facts.
And that's the CSRD.
SRD, yes, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, I think. And this is valid for the European companies, and there is a pollution part of it. And well, it's how we understand it. Yes, there will be a wider range of hazardous substances. So not only substance of very high concern, but substance of concern. So it's a wider angle, which is interesting. And those substances will have to be reported by hazard class and with revenue and volumes. And yes, this gives us a lot of more information. And yes, I can imagine that this is a big undertaking. Nevertheless, to be responsible, I think everyone in the companies need to know that. And to show to the outside world and to the investors and also to society, it does make sense to really publish those, and hopefully the other countries will follow. So I'm really looking forward to that. I don't know what an ERP system is, I must admit. Yeah.
But could you tell us a little bit, when can you expect the CSRD to come in effect?
The data has to be collected from next year onwards, and from 1st of January 2025, it's mandatory to report on that.
So it's quite recent. It's happening now. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. We're coming to a close. It's 4 p.m. here now in Sweden. So thank you so much for joining us. Someone asked where ChemScore is. You can go to just Google search ChemScore and you will find it. It's a big website and all the information will be there. Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks to Greg Porta and Mariana Villanueva for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.